I'm Kevin Ressler, and until the end of this month, I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Lancaster County. As many of you know, I will be moving on to an organization called the Alliance for Health Equity in Chester County. I am deeply honored to have been able to serve for the last 3.5 years as the president and CEO for United Way of Lancaster County. The work that we've been able to do together, including starting this conversation series, including many other things through the pandemic, and also bolstering up long-standing projects and processes to which we had already been involved in, will be a moment in my professional career that is held with deep pride and of the highest esteem. United Way is an incredibly important organization in any community, but here in Lancaster especially so, with our various programs like our 2-on-1 program, our VITA program, but also the One United Lancaster, which we'll have an article about this in the video posting sometime later this week. We are able to be a common place for a variety of people in a society that's presently very broken and in many ways intentionally trying to pull us from unity to division for personal, often gain too much, but also just because it can, for some individuals, protect their ability to maintain a status quo that for too many people is not sufficient. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In a lot of cases, we're going to be talking about folks who are marginalized, not just because of the actions that they may have taken, but in many cases because of the society that puts them in positions of impossibilities. The difficulty of reentry you're going to learn a lot about today, and how reentry challenges structurally often drive people back towards recidivism, back towards incarceration. And our goal here is to, frankly, even those folks you're going to learn from here today who are part of the system, their jobs are in some ways trying to work against the way the system is, in some cases intentionally, and in other cases unintentionally come about. And so we are grateful at United Way to host this conversation. It's an important topic. There are a multitude of other issues that we won't cover today, and facets of groups and individuals working in and around the system. But today I'm very, very excited to introduce you to a few folks. Then we're going to have a presentation as always. Then we'll jump back in for a conversation, some about the presentation specifically, but also about other issues. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Christine, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Christine, that would be me, not Christina. Hi, everybody. I am Chris Marr. I run the Reentry Employment Program at the Career Link Center in Lancaster. I'm a part of the treatment courts. We go into LCP because we also have a special grant. So I work alongside Christina, who's also on this. I'm currently sitting at adult probation and parole, where I also have another office location. So really out and about meeting our population where they're at versus stagnant in an office.
Thank you. And for those of you who heard your first acronym of the day, we always have them, LCP, Lancaster County Prison.
Thank you so much, yes.
Which is the county jail, but anyway, it's a whole confusing technicality. Anyway, we're going to jump over here to Ron. Ron Ashby, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good morning, my name is Ron. I became involved, I guess it's about 10 or 15 years ago, when one of the members from Lancaster Friends meeting suggested that I attend a meeting, and that meeting was for returning citizens. I've been active all of that time and would like to see more of that. What else do you need to know?
For now, you're good. We'll talk about what is returning citizens after the panel. Thank you, Ron.
Okay.
Christina.
Good morning. I am currently the reentry manager at Lancaster County Prison. I have been employed here for 15 years, started out in records. I also sit with Chris on all 3 treatment courts, as well as oversight of the reentry program in our facility for specifically the reentry New Beginnings class, as well as assisting our other staff with other reentry needs. And I work with all the individuals that have mental illness and substance abuse, and collect a lot of data on various key parts in here.
Thank you. Julie, if you want to introduce yourself, and if you can introduce you're going to hold a dual role here today in this conversation on professional United Way and personal experience, if you want to introduce both parts of what you bring to this conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Kevin. My name is Julie Kennedy, and I am the Associate Director of Community Initiatives at United Way. I have experience. I feel as if I can't call myself a reentrant because I haven't been upstate, as we would say, or in an actual prison, but I was incarcerated at several county jails in Georgia, South Carolina, and in Pennsylvania here. I'm in recovery. It's my 8th year of recovery, and I'm just passionate about the recovery community, the reentry community, and the amount of love and care that we must put into that community and that population.
Thank you. And so the rest of us panelists here are going to drop off of our cameras and make sure we're on mute. And last, Scott, introduce yourself. And then if you want to go ahead and pop up that presentation, you can carry us away, and we'll be back later. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Scott Tyre. I'm a state certified recovery specialist. That's a person with long-term recovery from substance use disorder that's given trainings and hours of curriculum to kind of professionalize the field of peer support. And I've been doing that for about a decade. More recently, I've been serving as more of a recovery consultant. I've kind of doing my own thing a little bit, and I'm working for New Beginnings, for the Neighbors coaching group that runs New Beginnings in the prison. I serve as a consultant for R3 Recovery House in Lancaster, which has 6 properties in Lancaster City that serves people in recovery with supportive housing. More recently, I've been working a lot on forensic peer support coming out of Lancaster County Prison. We have several programs that are just about ready to launch that's going to put peer support and other supportive services into the reentry cycle, so that folks that are getting medications in prison, medically assisted treatment like Suboxone and methadone, are going to be better served with support. And as they come out into the community, which is really, as I'll talk about in a second, where one of our biggest gaps is when they leave and they go into the community, the hope is that we're going to be able to supply peer support at that point of contact, which is going to help people get through that critical place, that 72-hour window from when they leave prison and they're reacclimating into their community. It's a very vulnerable spot. I should also mention, like Julie, I am a former inmate. I've been incarcerated in many institutions. My last incarceration was in 2010, which also coincided with me getting serious about being in recovery, coincidentally enough. So the justice system is a big part of my recovery. I talk about it a lot. I think it's important. And it's part of a lot of folks' recovery. So I think it's important that we look at reentry as a very healthy aspect of our community. It's a portion that has a segment of folks that are in and out of it all the time. It tends to be the same folks. And so we're not really addressing what's going on with that phenomenon. So they asked me to, I also mentioned I'm on the steering committee of the Reentry Coalition, and they asked me to do a presentation on what exactly it is that we do. So I'm going to try to do that. So the Reentry Coalition, the vision statement is to welcome individuals who transition from prison or jail back into their communities and try to help with every opportunity for success that they can have. The mission statement, the thing I like about the mission statement is the word cultivate. We serve to cultivate community engagement and collaboration. Ultimately, what we want, what everybody wants, is to lower recidivism, right? So how do we do that? I believe we do that through restored lives. And how do we do that? Well, we do that through access, understanding, and building capacity, not only in the community, but also it's very, very important. We don't forget about building capacity and helping to sustain capacity within individuals. The work that I've done in the prison, working with people who are incarcerated, has taught me more than I think any amount of education that I ever had previously, because of what their state of mind is when they're incarcerated and then what it is when they leave. And most recently, I had somebody tell me that it's very much like leaving an air-conditioned room when you walk out into August summer heat. That's sort of what it felt like to them to be released from prison. And I understood that. As a reentrant, I understand what they're saying. But what does that mean? And how do we work with that over time with people so that they can have success and stability? So they can have what I've been able to achieve, which is success and stability and contentment. I think contentment is an important word that we don't talk about a lot, because success is measured, right? We all have different opinions on what success is, but human contentment is something that I think really lends itself to stability and happiness. And if we can do that, we're going to lower recidivism, I promise. So cultivating community engagement and collaboration, to me, is at the root of that beginning of that. When we start to think about how do we do that. I'll point out that reentry is not a specific program, but a process. I will talk a lot about the folks that we work with as people who are, well, what's in common with this wheel? What do we see in this wheel that everything, what's in common here? I would say that they're all systems, right? The county government, the mental health services, community health center, substance treatment services, they're all systems, okay? But at the heart of the issue here are people. They're individuals. And these individuals are going to be going through all of these systems when they reenter, okay? So the systems don't do the individual any favors if they're isolated and they operate in silos. The problem is that a system, as we're probably all acquainted with, a system tends to operate on its own. It's like its own entity. And sometimes even for professionals and people that work in the field, working inside of that system is very, very challenging. And some people don't last because they simply can't function in the system to do what they want to do, which is work with people, okay? So I think that that's a real phenomenon that I don't know that I have all the answers to, but it's something I see on a daily basis. These are all systems, but sometimes we lose the focus that what we're working on here and at the heart of everything is people. And systems, I think, tend to reflect more of the compliance and conformity side of what we have to do. And there's a lot of that in life, right? I mean, you have to show up for work every day. You have to make it to your probation appointments. I mean, those things are just things that have to be done. However, like everything else in life, I think there's a balance somewhere in the middle. And I will say, for better or worse or indifference, a lot of the folks that I work with in prison or in the county jail at least, are in there because they failed to show up for an appointment. And there's always reasons. Some of them are valid, some of them are not, but there's always reasons for that. There are always barriers there that exist for this individual because none of them want to go back to prison. None of them do. But there are barriers in place that we see them coming back time and time again. And so we have to look at the systems that are represented in this wheel as to what's going on. The process really should begin at arrest and should immediately focus on restoration, which is another problem that I think we don't necessarily do. If somebody gets arrested, they go to jail, they're punished for their crime. And in many cases, there should be a punishment, right? I'm not an advocate of just, allowing criminal behavior to go unpunished. However, at the same time, we should always have an eye on restoration of the human spirit. And how do we bring that person back into our community as healthy and as whole as we can possibly manage? The three phases that we tend to look at in reentry: the incarceration, the transition, and the community phase. Between the incarceration phase and the transition phase, I think is a strength right now in our system, because we're doing a very good job of linking from inside, at least inside the county prison, where I'm familiar with, we link very well with outside agencies. We do. I think the people that are doing this work are overwhelmed with it, but they do a very good job with what they do, in the sense that they're linking people to the outside community, to outside services. They're giving them home plans for the most part that are comprehensive. programs like Pathways. Pathways is an excellent program that serves people with a variety, with a diversity of supports. It's not just one thing that they do. They do a variety of things, and they do them proficiently with people. And it's very, very simple to access the services. So it's not complicated for somebody to get involved. One of the weaknesses, however, that we have is when the person is in the community, say 2 or 3 months removed from the incarceration, we tend to see the recidivism rates going up. And so you ask yourself, why? Why is that happening? Well, because they're becoming disengaged with a lot of the systems and the connections that they've made back at the incarceration and transition phase, in my opinion. And there's lacking support when you're looking at 2 or 3 months down the road. Oftentimes they remain with probation and parole, but other than that, if they're working, they're showing up at parole probation, there's oftentimes little else. So I'm looking at that in the work that I do. I'm looking at that phase of a reentrance journey to see what we can do for more supportive services. Anybody that knows me knows that I am a huge advocate for peer support. They call it forensic peer support because it deals with incarcerated individuals. There's peer support in a lot of different ways. Mental health services have utilized peer support for a long, long time. Substance use disorder treatment has just come around in the last decade since I've been in the field to utilize it much more. And it's people with lived experience who also have some training under their belt and some time removed from the incarceration to be able to guide somebody, to help somebody navigate, to provide motivational coaching, just to be there as a journeyer with the person. And that's really what it is. You're journeying with the person. You're not coming in with a magic wand. You're not coming in with all the answers, but you're there to provide your lived experience as hope and as strength for the person as they navigate through the challenges that they have to navigate through. That alone provides an immense amount of momentum for a lot of people. It's something that I did not have. I didn't even know existed. And I feel like had I had an opportunity to have that in my life, I think it would have reduced the amount of recidivism that I went through. Because a lot of the times when I went back to jail, it was because, well, I had a really rampant substance use disorder, but it was about hope. It was about not believing that anything could ever be different. And it wasn't that I was a bad person, because I wasn't a bad person. I did bad things once in a while because my addiction, number one, and number two, I was constantly in the fight or flight mode. So I could never achieve contentment. I could never achieve stability. And without hope, the likelihood that you're going to self-motivate is not very strong. So you're vulnerable to recidivism. I hope this is making a little bit of sense. This slide is a big paragraph that basically talks about what I just outlined a little bit about our system being siloed. And what we want to do is we want to increase collaboration and reduce duplication, reduce people tripping over each other. Because I think when you look at a system's response to a problem, if there's resources, is to throw stuff at it. And sometimes we throw a lot at something. I know, for instance, when the opioid epidemic first came out and then it got really, really bad, the government released a ton of money and there was a ton of services thrown at the problem, okay? And sometimes more is not always better, depending on the quality of the services that are out there or the content of the services that are out there. So when we have duplication of services and we have people tripping over each other to try to serve the one person, it can get very overwhelming and confusing to the one person. And so that's not always the best way to go about doing things. So we have to champion collaboration, and we have to champion this idea that as professionals, we are a community as well, and we should work together as a community for the benefit of the people that we are trying to serve. And I think that's what of anything, I think that's the thing that the Reentry Coalition really strives to do, is bring people into the room and say, how do we work together better as a community for the individual. To sum up briefly, I mean, this is what we do. We identify our gaps and we try to educate. And then through that, we hopefully reduce stigma through understanding. And that in turn will motivate community members to become involved and to create positive change. But I'll also add that I believe it's extraordinarily problematic sometimes that we spend a lot of time worrying about the community and we're not educating the people that we serve. And I think that the education needs to start there. Communities start, after all, with the individual, right? And then the family unit. And then it branches out into the neighborhood and whatever community they represent. But it starts with the one person. So we need to start educating the people that we're serving. Because a lot of times they don't understand mental health. They don't understand substance use disorder. They don't understand that there's going to be real mental health issues that they're going to face after being incarcerated for 6 months or a year and they're released. There's going to be real challenges that they may not understand. They may think of themselves as the lowest form of life, right? They have this internalized self-stigma that we have to help them challenge in order to motivate them. Family systems need amazing amounts of help right now, especially with people and loved ones that have been incarcerated. Reunification with children, and I mean, the list goes on and on when it comes to how much empowerment we need to try to make greater access to for the individuals that we serve. That's very, very important. And I know that the coalition works more with the system approach, not so much with specific individuals, but the systems within that coalition absolutely work with those individuals. So I'm real passionate about empowering the one to make a greater impact on the community. That's about all I have. I guess we'll just move on and take questions at some point. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Scott. So I'll invite our panelists back up here and move that. A little glare there. So first of all, I just want to I want to thank both Scott and Julie for being open about their own history and their own past and their own experiences. That's not something, this is like the way people work, right? Like, it's not something that should have to be done to increase the empathy that people have. Unfortunately, we as human beings sometimes struggle with the abstract, and as Scott talked about, jump to like, oh, the community or the concerns or whatever, and aren't thinking as much about how you're a human being. And I think for individuals in community, we need to sometimes just make those associations with people we know, love, care for, respect, see as successful, all those things. But also, Scott, your point is really important. And I mentioned before we began, but for those of you that here as we're doing this, my undergraduate degree was in peace and conflict studies, and I for a period did some work inside of incarceration facilities and the populations, and you know, when you said, Scott, it took me back to a couple of different individuals. When you said some people think of themselves as being the lowest form of life, right? Being able to see and associate with someone who also has a substance abuse disorder like I do, and that they are able to insert whatever sort of level of success for them, it's really important to be able to have those known and unknown role models. But it also takes a lot of courage and comes with both professional and personal risk to you all. So I just want to thank you both as a model and encourage those of you, whether it's issues of incarceration. I had a function last night at a faith community where someone was talking about them being LGBT and those types of spaces, to be able to be an advocate in a space that may not be as welcoming otherwise is a powerful thing. So I just want to begin by thanking both of you for that willingness and that courage. And then I will also ask and encourage those of us who are not in that place how can we learn to be transformed without requiring knowing someone specifically? How can we be open to thinking differently about others without having to know someone before we evolve our thinking towards justice and openness and welcomeness? We should not require those who have already suffered to suffer further for our ability to be unmoored from our previous thinking. So just an encouragement on that side too. I want to start this conversation here with Christina Flugel. So you know, Scott was just talking about the systems. They're unwieldy. They become their own thing. They're full of well-intentioned people who want to help, but they're bureaucratic, right? So they take on their own life. But so what is it that has been intentionally done, programs and supports from Lancaster County Prison, where you're saying, hey, let's try to wrangle this stuff and let's find a way to help support people who are reentering after incarceration? What are some of those programs and supports that you all are able to do?
As Scott had said, Neighbors Coaching, the New Beginnings program, we offer a 2-week psychosocial reentry class for individuals that are close to release. As part of that, we do reentry planning with them, myself and our reentry caseworker, and we follow up with them in the community as well. Anyone that goes through that program gets our contact numbers, and we're available to them for issues, resources if they need to talk, so that we can continue to help them. We say that as long as you've done the program, if you did the program, you're in it forever. You can go a year without talking to us and come back and say, I need help, and we're here for you. We assist with IDs. We have a program where we can get individuals that are incarcerated, not only New Beginnings individuals, but the entire population, copy or state IDs or driver's license at no cost to them. We assist with birth certificates, in-state and out-of-state. If it's out-of-state, we pay for that from the prison's funds. We do Social Security cards. We do medical assistance, so that when they walk out the door, their medical is turned on, as well as we're doing the continuation of the medication-assisted treatment at the moment. Originally, it was just pregnant females that maintained methadone, but we now are continuation methadone inside the facility. Subutex, we're doing continuation, and we have a very well-rounded Vivitrol program. And anyone that is, sorry, pardon my radio, if anyone that is on the medication-assisted treatment, we do their MA for them. It gets scanned into mine, and I am notified prior to their release, no matter what time, day or night, so I can submit it and get it turned on. We have drug and alcohol programming in-house, as well as various community partners that come in and run different programs like Pathways with Chris. We have a parenting class. We have Kobe Seek and Safety that comes in. Mental Health America is running educational and support groups here, so that these connections can be formed before they are released.
So we do have a question here related, which maybe is a perfect time to grab this one right now. Paula asked what the success rate is for New Beginnings. And I don't know if you have that off the top of your head from like a quantitative standpoint, but even qualitatively, can you just talk about what does success look like for New Beginnings?
I guess the overall general success would be not recidivating and coming back in. But I do, if I can get into my folder, have our statistics for it, because we track that monthly, and that is on our website with our prison reentry or prison board reports every month.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. So while you're looking for that, I want to just mention that you're the perfect person for me and Kim Maldonado here to reach out to, because we have been talking about, so we run the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, free tax preparation for households making $60,000 a year or less. And our associate director here, Jennifer Horn, used to work, she worked at YIC, the Youth Intervention Center, for like 20 years. And she was like, we've got to figure out how to partner. So you're going to get a follow-up from us, but also anybody else who's doing a program that might make sense to help in this population as they're coming back out, not add on to the burdens. Christina, are you the person for folks who run organizational programs to reach out to, or would there be someone else to connect?
I can be the first point of contact and then bring in others as needed.
Perfect. Awesome. Great. Thank you. So
And as for the reentry program, year to date or through the initiation of the program, since we started tracking and we got the funding for it through the county, 231 participants have successfully completed it. At 90 days from release, our recidivism is 9.7%. At 3 years, it does go up to 59.6, but that is only 47 participants that have reached that timeframe out of the 231. And that is as of May 31st.
and compared, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but compared to the general recidivism rate for incarcerated populations, which is usually hovering over 70%, that's a pretty significant success rate, I'd say.
Can I just jump in
Yeah,
real
Scott,
quick?
please.
The New Beginnings curriculum, as Christina knows, it's a transformative curriculum. It really confronts a lot of issues with inmates. So it's a very it's intense. It's very, very intense, and it's compacted in 2 weeks. And then we just graduated 7 women the other day who were just amazing on Friday, full of life and full of all this hope and full of all of this stuff that they get from this program. So the job now is to take that through to release and then apply it on the outside. That's the hard part. That's the hard part, because most of the women are also challenged with trauma, mental health concerns, family units that need a lot of work. That's the real work that needs to be done. So what they just learned in 2 weeks is a lot of real intense tools, but now they have to apply them on the outside.
So thanks, Scott. That's a perfect jump into the sort of next person I want to bring into this conversation, Ron. So someone is inside of the system, right? Christina's got her programs and supports. They graduate folks, they leave. Before we'll go to Christine next. Chris over there helping them find jobs. But even before that, they show back up into society, into community. Can you tell us about what Returning Citizens Group is and what they're trying to think about as sort of general community space?
Returning Citizens is exactly what it sounds like. It is a group of folks who have come to realize that they need some support, and support would be very nice. It is client-led. In other words, the person who's leading the meeting, running the meeting, is someone who has been incarcerated and has been coming to our meeting for I think it's about 30 weeks or so, having had the experience of being out into society and now coming back into society and all the little stuff that happens. We have mentors who do things like provide transportation, support, okay? My family is going berserk over me coming back home, and the person gets to talk to and bring that up in the meeting, and inevitably there is someone there who has experienced a similar situation, and it's not therapy, but it is a way for folks to kind of vent what is going on. What else can I say? In the past, the distant past, we have been doing some fundraising, and the way we did that was to go to individual houses of worship and do a little education around what is a returning citizen and what it's how can you help? And as a result, we had got some money, and we got simple things like shoes and clothing and bus passes, and all those small things that you and I don't consider, which can be a challenge to someone who's just first coming out. They are allowed and encouraged to keep coming as long as they want or feel the need. And that is very nice when you have someone who's leading the meeting and has been out in society for the past 4, 5, 6 years. Others look at that person and say, yes, I can do this too. I can do this. This is not foreign to me.
So the group is other individuals who have already lived this journey of re-entering. They're providing support. They're in some cases, it probably sounds like there's a little bit of almost step-in family type of roles because they're maybe estranged from family, friend roles because they probably have some estrangement from friends, and then just all sort of the social. So it's almost creating a web of normal social relationships for individuals who, because of their status in society, may have had some of those normal relationships falling away. So you said one of the things you said was like transportation, which was one of the things I wanted to ask Chris. I mean, so someone comes out of being in prison, whether that's right, they've been federal prison, state prison, county jail, whatever it is, they're coming back, and there are barriers because many places still do background checks and you can't even get an interview, yada yada yada. But we go from that all the way up to felonies, where like the challenges for a felon to get a job are significant in many cases, right? Because of just the various barriers, whether it's geography, all those things. So you've got a pretty diverse set of challenges that you're faced with to try to help individuals careering, to help them move into reentry. So we'll set aside some of those things like transportation and those things first. Just sort of broadly, what are, or actually, never mind, don't set it aside. If that's what it is, answer. But what are the biggest challenges people are facing reentering into the job market, whether that's the felony or that is even just sort of like a misdemeanor, but someone Googles your name and they see you were arrested, right? What are the biggest challenges within this population?
I would say if we are talking getting them ready for work, it's more than just showing up at a job. So we had to really back up our system to say, what additional barriers are you facing other than that big giant felony that's sitting on your record? As mentioned, transportation is huge. I would say housing is even bigger. Lancaster has a huge housing issue. We're working on that. The coalition's working on that. But if you don't have stable housing, how in the world are you getting employed? So we have to listen to all these additional barriers that are in the way of employment, because if they're not addressed, they're not going to be successful. We don't want to waste an employer's time by having them show up for a day or two and finding out because of all these additional barriers that are not addressed, they're not going to sustain that employability. And that's important to our employers. Our employers are our clients as well. So we have to listen to what employers need, and we have to listen to what the clients need. So transportation, housing, some of them just lack experience. They've got street smarts, but they don't have experience in a job. So we have to pull out some transferable skills from stuff that they've done, even if it's illegal. Digital literacy is huge. They have not had access to computers. They don't have smartphones. If they're coming from upstate, they've been incarcerated for 30 years. They don't even know what Google is. So, our employers and our society expects them to just hop on a computer and be able to do job searching, to apply for jobs, to upload resumes. They don't have a resume. They don't even know what uploading means. So you really have to listen to where they're at, and they're all at a different place, every single one of them. So we've had to just make sure that we are listening to them as an individual and addressing all those additional barriers prior to employment to be able to make them successful in employment. A lot of them just don't know how to navigate around, the whole employment world. How do you apply for jobs? What are the questions, and what are they asking? How do you address your background? What do they mean? Some don't know the difference between an arrest and a conviction. So you really have to educate the client as well. We just did a whole bunch of roundtables on Thursday and Friday over at the chamber, and had to explain to employers, a lot of times they just don't know how to read their own record. They don't know what the difference between an official record and an unofficial record. And sometimes they just answer a question completely innocent. But if they already go in with the I am a criminal, and you answer something incorrectly because you just are unsure of how to answer it, now you're also labeled a liar. So, we really have to work on having the employers listen to the story, listen to the person, ask questions. As Jeff A. said, be curious without judging. So it's okay to ask questions to get the story. So they're facing the overall stigma of society, and they've got to go into an employer and tell a story that they don't even know this person, and they have to tell their story in a way that's not going to scare off the employer, but yet being honest. So there's a lot of work that goes into each one of them. And feedback from employers is key to us to be able to work with that individual. So, we really, as a community, have to do better at what we're doing and listen to each other and try to figure out how to educate each other to deal with this population.
So my grandfather-in-law, my late grandfather-in-law, Northwestern PA, owned a dairy production plant. And back in the 60s and 70s, he was really early at hiring sort of second chance individuals, those coming out of reentry. And I remember having a conversation with him once that he was very proud that he did that before you got money from the state. Are there still supports that come, whether it's financial support or grants or other things through that career link system or workforce development board to support employers who are willing to do the second chance hiring? I don't know, Chris, if you're the best one to talk about that, but I'd be curious to, just for those who may be listening, to be like, hey, you don't have to be doing this all on your own. There's support here.
Yeah, there's financial support to the employers, but there's also just the support the employers need to deal with this population. My employers, I tell them, hey, I will come in, I will sit down, I'll have conversations with my client, so that we can make sure that this placement's a good placement and that we are not losing this placement. But we have funding for on-the-job training opportunities. So yes, our clients have funding for a training, like an ITA training, which is an individualized training account, like a certification, welding, CDL. We also have funding where we can support the employers, where we can give them up to $10,000 to hire the client on, to train them in the skills that might be lacking. Maybe they really like that person and they see they have some of the skills and they need, hey, if you just had a little more of the skill set that we're looking for, we can reimburse the employer up to 75% of the client's wages. So there's an incentive to the employer, and that's the reimbursement piece of it, and the support that we're going to give the employer as well as the client. And then there's, the client is earning while they're learning at the same time. So yes, that's why we have a whole business services team to offer services to the employer, but there are funds available to the employer as well as funds available to the client.
So I had, when I ran Meals on Wheels, we took a lot of court-appointed community service hour individuals. I made a policy that we would accept anyone who needed to do voluntary service hours, but it didn't mean that they could do just anything, right? So we had someone who came and they'd had retail theft on their record. Well, I wasn't going to send that person to the homes of individuals to deliver meals, but having them help prepare the meals in the kitchen was still as valuable to us as an organization, allow them to receive their court-appointed community service hours. Julie, I know that part of your life experience has included community service hours. In fact, it ended up with you being at United Way. But could you talk a little bit about how those hours, what are the opportunities that presents? I mean, I think, when people get community service, no one's like, yay, but it is also an opportunity that it presents. Can you talk about how that becomes an opportunity and what that's been in your own experience?
Sure, yes. And I received 200 hours, which is steep for my crime, but I was charged with criminal damage to property because I keyed a car that was very expensive while I was in active addiction. So how did I look at this? I looked at, well, I didn't have a job anymore. I had been fired from my job for drug use. So these 200 hours, I'm going to take these hours and I'm going to work at different places. Some were places that I'd always wanted to work at, like the library. And then some were places where I liked clothing. So I was at the Reuse It shops here in Pennsylvania, which were so amazing to me in my serving of those hours. They were always very responsive and very helpful. And then my very last, I believe, 50 hours were spent with United Way. And I was a tax scheduler with 211 for the VITA program. And what stuck with me about United Way was the stigma wasn't there. I was a valued volunteer. I was accepted with the most grace and compassion. Tony Gaynor, who was the executive director there, always asked how I was doing. When I came to her with my paper, I always talk about this little paper that becomes your, like, if you lose that, that's it. You're so scared to lose this piece of paper with all these signatures on it. And you're like, huh. But she would sign it, then we'd have a discussion and a conversation and a dialogue. And I shared so much about my life with her that we became friends. And she looked beyond anything that was attached to me, like a stigma of just having tattoos, a stigma of having a record, of being in recovery. She looked at those as assets. And she, eventually I got hired by United Way, which, has been an amazing, incredible experience. It was not my first job coming out of recovery and out of the Lancaster County Prison. I started with a job that paid me $300 an hour, or $300 a week. Sorry, not an hour. That would have been great. But it was because every time I applied somewhere, when I would have to say, like, I have a criminal record, I think they just tossed it. I don't think they even, acknowledged that I had applied to a job. I had one interview where I had this amazing interview. I was about to make the most money I've ever made in my life as a sales consultant. And they ran my background check. And I even was honest about a DUI in that interview. And the executive director of that company called me and said, "I'm sorry, our main office won't let me hire you for a DUI." So I think that my personal thought is that community service should be taken as an opportunity for you to connect, network, treat it like a job interview on site. I probably could have gotten a job at any of those places just because of the hard work that I did. I just didn't report and just kind of fumble through everything. I reported there and I did the work and I showed them what type of person I was, not what this piece of paper said I was, but who I was. And I think that because of that, those hours, looking back on them, they were, there's those moments that are transformative for you. And, I've heard from women that I've visited with in the Lancaster County Prison who they don't have any hope left. They don't have any, they're like, what's for me outside of the walls here? But the best thing for me is that I've been able to sit there with them and tell them, I am exactly like you. I've lost custody of my child. I was in active addiction. I've been arrested multiple times. The only thing that separates us right now is that I didn't give up ever. I didn't, like, if someone said no, I took it as a burst, like it was like an energy drink. I was like, okay, well, I have to prove you wrong now. So that's just the way that you have to approach it. And with, again, coming back to community service, I'm so proud that we can be a resource of community service for our neighbors that are reentering and the neighbors who are serving those hours. And there are really great organizations out there that, can really welcome you and allow you to take with dignity and respect carry out those hours.
Thanks. I didn't hire Julie. Julie was hired before I arrived here. I promoted her a number of times because, frankly, she has a very strong resume. And so, unfortunately, when I hear stories like Julie, where she has a strong resume, it makes me worry even more about those who don't have a background in working in a large entity as a supervisor. In Julie's case, she's got a certificate in graphic design and has her own side business as a graphic designer. So she had that strong resume, and yet she's facing some of those barriers. In previous jobs, I have hired individuals who come, same as Julie, coming through the community service hour thing. And so just to say to nonprofit leaders and organizations, it really is a great opportunity. One, because you do get a little bit of an opportunity to have someone with you for in cases weeks, and you get to test them out and see how hard they are as a worker. I've had some individuals who I wanted them to stay, and they had another job offer and they left, and I had others who were able to stay. But what's really also important for you as nonprofit leaders is that individuals with lived experience can often teach those of us who have a lot of books behind us and a lot of degrees above us, but don't have that lived experience. We're operating on theory, and these folks are operating on practice. And there's so much that we need to learn. When we say we're out there doing this work to help people, and none of us actually have ever experienced the challenges that they face, it is really important to get individuals in the room. So one quick plug for those of you who may have some of those barriers and lived experience is our Project Blueprint at United Way to train individuals in how to serve in leadership positions on boards and other community involvement activities. We are doing that intentionally, targeting underrepresented community groups in order to try to transform where you can go. And for those of you as organizations who say we'd like to do that, but we don't know how, we also have a training program through Project Blueprint to help you be better equipped and understanding of inclusive leadership and transformative leadership. So your organizations are better equipped not to tokenize individuals from marginalized communities, but to authentically welcome them into your space, to learn from them, to listen to them, and to be transformed because of them, to be better organizations for the community. Scott, I want to ask you, what is R3 House? Can you tell us what that is, and then jump from there into sort of the biggest issue you're seeing affecting reentry right now?
Sure. R3 House is a sober living environment for people in early recovery from substance use disorder. We have 6 properties. We serve 83 men and women amongst those 6 properties. And R3 sort of tries to, we have a lot of peer support. We have a lot of social services that are embedded in the organization, so that when people come in from treatment, they're immediately met with case management and peer support. And we try to give people an environment that is very strong for them to be able to come in and do the things that they have to do, the work that they have to do. We feel very strongly that environment has a lot to do with your potential. And so as an organization, we feel like we can provide an environment. If you're willing to commit and do the work, we can help you do that with a nice solid environment to start with. And so then the challenges that I see honestly have, and I've really found myself working on this more than anything as a peer support provider, is with people's mental health and people's spiritual and emotional, physical, mental growth. Everybody has baggage to unpack. I did, I still do. And I think that is a huge part of the challenge that people face. And that's an extraordinarily individualized process. So it's honoring people where they are. It's making sure they're well informed and they have access to the resources that are out there, that they understand where they are, that they have support to navigate through them, to not give up, even through the bad days where you do struggle, you will struggle. That's really the essence of it, is working with somebody. We say, well, we're going to meet you where you are. And that's true physically, but it's also true mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Meeting people where they are means accepting them where they are and saying that this is where you are and it's okay to be who you are and where you are. But where do we want to go? because most people do not want to stay there, and we shouldn't be leaving them there. You know, we should be challenging them to move forward, but saying, let's go, I'll go with you, you know, so long as you're okay with that. Like, you know, we can't assume that they want that support at that time either, but for those that do, anyway, if I answered your question, but that's what I'm seeing right now is it's just mental health, really.
If I can say
Yeah,
something,
good.
Kevin. I remember when I was in rehab, and they'd said, my counselor at that point said to me, you know, this 30 days, like your recovery isn't going to be 30 days. It's going to be about a year. And you're not going back to what you thought you were going back to. You're going to be spending a lot of time learning and being in groups where you're going to be learning new things about how to handle tough situations. But this is just the start. And me thinking about that because I thought, oh, after 30 days, I'm free. I can just do what I want to do again. Well, no, you can't, because what you were doing didn't work. And it's the same with reentry. Yeah, you're released, but you can't just go back to the exact same relationships, environments, places. We say people, places, things in recovery. It's just that. You have to take a very hard look at your relationships, the boundaries that you set, the friends who call themselves your friends, and surrender to the process that Scott is explaining. That it really is this great time in your life to reassess what you have been living like and how you can be living ahead, and taking those resources and just accepting them and being fully vetted into that is so important.
Ron, I saw you nodding pretty vigorously there as Julie was talking. Do you want to add on to that in any way? And you're muted if you want to grab that.
There we go. I'm agreeing to that because one of the jobs I had before I retired was working at the Coastal VA Medical Center. And my job was to counsel folks with mental health disorders and addiction. They often come together and so, I'm sorry, I'm here. It is very, very important for aftercare, okay? So they're in there, said we do group, we do lots of study and just stuff looking at the past and the future, but what's really important is what they do when they leave. And that's the key. So part of my job that I took very, very seriously was to make sure that folks had access to sometimes to recovery groups. And a lot of times we'd get on the phone and call them and say, I'm a new person, I'm about to be reentry into the society, and can I meet you at your first meeting, my first meeting? And that really, really, really helps, because to ask somebody to go to the meeting and not know anybody is difficult. But if they know that there's going to be somebody there to greet them, that is a big advantage. Yes, discharge, 12-step meetings, therapy meetings, got to know what your meds are, on and on and on. It was a very busy job, but I loved it. So being part of Returning Citizens allows me to use some of the skills that I've gained over the years, over the past 20 years there.
having
you.
those peer support, I was just add to that, having those peer supports so critical. And yes, and with myself with AA, it's that I made one phone call and the chain of events happened. It was
Yes.
just, I was picked up for my first meeting by a woman who became a sponsor for me, much like a peer support specialist or a certified recovery specialist. That person became, so committed to helping me navigate and figure out how to do things. And yeah, sometimes pick me up and take me places, which was so
Mhm.
helpful.
So when I was 22 or 23, I was doing some trainings, some nonviolence trainings, alternatives to violence trainings, so helping people. I was doing a variety of different things, but helping people with emotional control. And I was working, it was in SCI Graterford. I don't think is open anymore. I think it's closed Graterford, but so State Correctional Institute, sorry, acronym again, State Correctional Institute, Graterford. And I was doing the project we were doing, that training was a weekend long training. So we would go home and sleep. Obviously, we wouldn't sleep behind bars, but then we would come back in the morning for a whole day thing. And it was 3 days. It was a weekend training. And I got to know that. So there was about 20 guys. Like Pennsylvania is one of a number of states, far too increasing right now, that will do life without possibility of parole. In PA, anything that's first or second degree murder, some other things, but life without possibility of parole. So these guys are this is why they're called lifers. Like, they are in there for the rest of their life. There's just no way that they're going to be, unless they have a commuted sentence, which in Pennsylvania now is almost extremely impossible to get, and it's always been very rare. And so I am getting to know these guys, and there's one guy who's young, and I eventually ask him his age. He says he's 23. At the time I had dreadlocks. He's a young black guy. He's within a year of my age, dreadlocks. Ask where he's from. He's from Harrisburg. I grew up in Lancaster, not far away. Start talking about our different lives. And, it was sort of scary when I started to see how simply one life can transform its path. He had been, like me, a kid in middle school who, smoked weed, once or twice. And in his case, he was hanging out with some guys who were selling it. And I had friends who sold weed. I wasn't selling weed. He wasn't selling it. He was with them, and they got caught. So first time he went behind bars. And then he, had, as he's coming out, he's having trouble as he's 16 getting a job and those things. So what does he do to make money? He goes back to those friends, and they help him have an opportunity where he can make money, because no one would give him a job, because when he was 14 years old, he got arrested. And so now he's going to make money. Next, he has a kid. And I didn't have a kid at 18, but now he's got a kid. Now he wants to support his kid. So what does he do? He wants to make more money. What does he do? He sells more drugs, harder drugs, starts getting mixed up in a whole bunch of things, ends up going in prison. Every time he goes in prison, he finds a new connection, and then also finds a new opportunity, skill, comes out. Anyway, all this to say that the individual was about 21 or 22. He hadn't been in for long as a lifer. He was a getaway driver on a botched robbery. Person gets killed because they had gone with a gun, and he knew they had a gun. It counts as premeditated murder, the second degree offense, which means he's in life without parole. And I asked him, I said, I look at your life, and I'm like, man, I could have been in the wrong place, wrong time, could have derailed my life. I wouldn't have the degrees. I wouldn't have all these things I have that I needed student loans for, which you're ineligible because you have a felony, all these things. So what could have been different in your life? And he said, the one time that I was able to get out of the cycle was after I got released. I fled to Florida. He was let out, but he was not allowed to go live in Florida because of the terms of his probation. He said, but I made new friends. He said, I found a job that didn't run my background check, and I was away from use. He said, they caught me, they brought me back. When they let me back out, they put me back on the same block I'd always been. And what happened? I hung out with the same folks and the same thing. This is a common story for a lot of folks. And so, when we see these sort of generational issues, or these sort of, bounce back issues that happen too often because our available options for when they're exiting from the barriers that we place put people into positions where it's difficult for them to make other decisions. So my question in this is sort of a toss-up for any of you. If you had the ear of a legislator and could say, here's a reform I'd like for you to see, that I'd like for you to pursue, that could reduce recidivism, what would something that you would say to those who do control the mechanisms of the system? What would you ask for to make the environments that we have less likely to drive back towards recidivism? And none of you were given this question ahead of time, so sorry if you don't feel prepared.
For me watching this, you can't keep putting them back in the same exact environment. They're not going to succeed. We talk about the people, places, and things. So they can't afford not to go back to the same environment. Someone's going to let them couch surf. Someone's going to, whatever. So we need to be able to send them someplace but it needs to be someplace that's livable. We want to make sure that there's a nice housing, but you can't start, you're released and expected to, your housing is there, your food is there, your family's there, your job is there, your car's there. And that's not the case. They literally walk out with nothing. And so what are they going to do? They're going to go right back to those people, places, and things that caused this to begin with. So we're not thinking smart. That's the dumbest thing to do, is send them right back where they came from and expect them to come up with different results. They made bad choices. They're going to continue to make those bad choices because they're in the same exact environment. So we really need to think smart about sending them someplace that's going to be a good fit for them. It's not a one size fits all. It truly is not a one size fits all. But it has to be a nice place that they want to go to. But yeah, you got to get them out of the people, places, and things. You have to. It's very, very different. I'm not saying all of them are going to, go back to the life that they came from, but the majority of them are. That's why recidivism is so high, or one of the contributing factors anyway.
I think more effort needs to be placed on with parole violations and looking at parole violations, what terms of a parole violation should send someone back to incarceration and what shouldn't. The women that I've met in all three of those jails were parole violation, tickets, parole violation. It was just over and over and over again. And every single time that happens, they go back 5 years. It's like they just keep losing all that. Plus, it takes so much money of our money for these individuals to keep returning to prison. Let's invest in job training, give them, if subsidized housing isn't available if you are a felon, things like that, like the same supports that we would give as a welcoming community, that's what we are, the same resources we would give our new refugee neighbors, our new returning veterans. These are all people returning and coming to our community with so much trauma and so much sickness, of mental illness, of addiction, that they need supports in place. It's very sad to see someone have to it's almost like a domestic violence situation. They have to return to this abusive situation, the situation where they can't do anything but continue to do. Though I'll never forget a woman that I met in LCP said, well, why wouldn't I go back to what I was doing? I made $200,000 a year stealing stuff. And someone just told me I was unemployable. I said, well, and what Chris said was, you find ways to make it, well, you have this skill then, so let's find a way. So you have a really great skill at knowing where there are gaps in security systems. So become a consultant for security systems. Like that's how you twist it. But yeah, the parole violations and sending someone right back to where they were at before and at square one just for one small violation, that needs to change.
there was a gentleman in my neighborhood. I live in a poor neighborhood. There's a gentleman in my neighborhood who's a bit of a slumlord. He's a young African-American man, early 40s. He spent a lot of time behind bars for drug dealing and drug running. And he hired his friends and paid them in cash. He goes upstate. He comes back a couple years later and he's looking to get his crew back together. And he notices that they're all painting houses. They're getting paid the same as he was before. And he realizes, and there's a bittersweet story here, but he said to me one day, he goes, I come back and I see a bunch of these rich white guys. They're hiring the same guys I did, and they're taking advantage of the same people I took advantage of with drugs. He's like, so that's when I learned how to flip houses and to basically just take advantage of people doing that. They can't take me back to prison. I was like, so close. Like, can we? So I've talked to them. I've been like, how can you think about that? But I've praised him for being able to transform that lack of sort of wise thinking in how you're doing economics in your community. Can we do this a little bit better? But that transformative thinking is really valuable to find how do we harness that and how do we help an individual like that serve on the workforce development board or something like that, so we can actually have those lived experiences. Does anybody? There's a question here, and I don't know the answer to this. If the Department of Corrections still funds halfway houses for state parolees, I don't know a whole lot about currently what resources are given to help individuals in there. The state does?
The state did. I'm not sure if they still do, but they did.
Yeah. So.
Not the county. I mean, there's no real help for the county folks.
Right.
But
Right.
I want to just add on real quick about everything everybody's saying is spot on. And I would say that we need a stronger investment on the state level in diversion programs from the point of arrest. Okay. And so we may have to create this from the ground up because a lot doesn't exist. But if you look at second chances, they're doing amazing work right now, and they're not getting enough attention for the work they're doing because it's groundbreaking work. And the idea that we can take somebody at the point of arrest, retrain them, offer them different services, because funneling them back into a prison system that just traumatizes them more is not, and then expecting them to come out and just regain their life is not a model that works. It just doesn't. So we have to look at our system in terms of, we need to redesign this thing. And so it goes to like parole and probation violations. It goes to, the more lesser crimes where somebody that doesn't have the wherewithal is going to sit in jail for 6 to 8 months because they can't afford a lawyer, or they can't. And it goes to all of that. It's like, why would you want them to sit there in the first place? Especially if they have a family, they have a job that they're now going to lose. I mean, it goes on and on. So diversion programs show so much promise, but we don't have the structure, we don't have the infrastructure in place to support some of these diversion programs. It's like, okay, we'll put the workforce out there, we'll have the diversion program, but then what do we do with the folks once a lot of them are like, yeah, I'll sign up for that. What do I got to do? And they're scrambling around to figure out where to put people and how to send them off to get what they need to succeed. So we need a stronger investment from our state government and stuff like that.
And philosophically, it's the shift from, and this is society needs to do this, from retributive justice to restorative justice, right?
Yes.
That where we're just punishing people doesn't do it. Whether that's the bail stuff that you're talking, so bail reform and just punishing poor people for being poor with unrealistic bail when they're never going to flee, they're going to show up to the court cases anyway, or it's, some of these where we disallow individuals to have the driver's license and they're in rural communities that we don't invest in any level of public transportation. They got to get to their job. What do? They drive. What happens? Back in prison. And those types of things, I think we as a society need to do a better job. And also, these things should not be, I love what you're saying, Scott, but I also want to be clear, these should not be a privilege of the rich, right? Like the ARD program costs $1,500. So you, as a wealthier person, get to have a free DUI, pay and get out of it. But if you're poor, you don't have that option. We as a society need to be more comfortable with saying we're going to pay for our taxes or whatever for our neighbors to be more successful, which ultimately actually in the end is selfish because it makes us more successful as a society. But we've got to do a better job as a society saying lock them up, throw away the key has never done anything good for the person or frankly for the society itself. Doesn't make us safer, doesn't make us more effective. And then disbarment. So like felony disbarment from voting is so undemocratic, it's disgusting, frankly. But those kinds of disbarments to being a citizen are unacceptable in my opinion. Ron or Christina?
I'd like to make just a brief statement. You talked about ABP, right?
Yeah.
And I think that program is, when done correctly, is very, very, very powerful. I mean, when I was working as a therapist and we do group therapy, some of the activities that we use in ABP are used in group therapy, and it is amazing. So I don't know how you translate that, but it would be good to have more of that kind of thing around. It really does hit a lot of areas that people need. Form relationships, you learn how to communicate, how to identify your feelings, how to deal with anxiety and pressure, and it's just a good thing. And the wonderful part is that it came from the prison system right after the Attica riot.
Yeah.
That's when AVP came into existence, and it's all around the world, which is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing, all over the world. So.
Yeah, no, so I haven't done alternative violence program in like 10 years or longer probably. But that and other programs like it are really valuable, where they teach individuals, Ron summarized some of that, but they teach things as simple as like I statements, stuff that a lot of community members have never learned before, but help you in your communication. I feel when you do this, right? I feel this way, right? Those kinds of communication, nonviolent communication means and other activities allow us to transform how people operate while they're behind, or also once they come back into community. Christina, you're inside the system. Don't be afraid of your bosses saying, "Hey, don't tell me how to do my job." What are the things that you think from inside the system? I really would relish hearing things that you think could be done to help these parts of these neighbors and community partners, and Julie likes to talk about neighbors a lot. That we look at individuals as people, and their success matters to us, not just to them. How can we change some of the way things operate to improve outcomes?
I think we need to focus more on the special populations. They are forgotten, especially sex offenders for one. There is not many resources. All populations struggle with housing, but they are one that there is very limited resources on where we can assist them with transitioning out. So instead they end up sitting here and maxing out on their sentence, or being registered as a transient to a street corner, which is just setting them up for failure right off the bat. I agree with Scott with the diversion programs. We see many individuals that come in with various mental health issues that this is not the setting for them. And I would like to say that we have gotten good on our side of finding or identifying these individuals at commitment. That communication is pretty decent in here, that we can start immediately with getting we have a MISA team or IDT meetings where individuals from various departments meet to discuss these individuals and how we can assist them to minimize their stay here and get them into appropriate placement. So we have been productive on our end, but they shouldn't even get inside the door. If we can divert them before they get here, that would be beneficial for all involved. It's traumatic for individuals when they come in, especially. We have seen an increase in individuals with autism coming in here. And the sounds, I have a family member that's autistic, and the slamming of the doors and the echoes, and I can only imagine how traumatic it is to them.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, when I ran Meals on Wheels, we had a house that we delivered Meals on Wheels to, a lot of older men, and they were all registered sex offenders. And it was like a weird location. And the reason it was because it was a certain amount of distance from any school, from any park, from all these things. Well, when when you actually can find those locations, what you realize is you've put that group of individuals in a place that is literally geographically as far from any possible service as you can possibly get, because you've designed it to say they can't be near that, they can't be near this, they can't. So they end up in the Venn diagram of where no one has any geographical access to anything. So it's just not, it's not personable, it's not helpful. But it was really fascinating for us. I did not realize the house wasn't listed or whatever. And but this is just a humanizing story, but we had a Boy Scout who would go deliver with his mom, and he walked up to deliver and delivered the meals. There was like 3 in a house of like 7 men. And I got a call within like 3 minutes of him leaving from one of the housemates. He said, Kevin, you don't know this, but this house only has registered sex offenders. You cannot send an under 18 boy here, or girl, or anyone. He said, just you need to know that. And so, I mean, great on him for being an advocate in that way. But it was, I said, why? You didn't have to tell me this. He said, yeah, I do. He said, do you know how hard it was for me to find this housing? If there was a violation, this house would be shut down and I would be homeless. He said, I'm not really asking. I'm telling you, don't send anyone under 18 here. Please do not send anyone here. Because he knew how precious and rare it was for him to find a place to live. And obviously there's a whole bunch of reasons why we shouldn't have sent underage individuals to that location, and that was fine. It's not hard for us to make as an institution, but it was really, really, really sort of heart-wrenching to just hear this person pleading to make sure that he didn't end up homeless, because that was the only other option. So those populations, and sometimes they are harder for us as people to feel sympathetic or empathetic towards, because the crime may be this or that or the other thing. But it does not help us to not have resources for individuals. So we're getting closer to time. So I want to just give each an opportunity for you all to just sort of anything that you want, just real briefly, like a minute or so. Like, on this, what is it that you wish for and hoped individuals knew or would do, or whatever it is, but what's something that you yearn for us to have better outcomes for our neighbors who have faced incarceration? And I'll go ahead and we'll start with you, Scott.
I think for me, I'm a real proponent on environment and on changing the conditions that create a lot of the problems that lead to incarceration, and that has a lot to do with, it's a lot of philosophy. It's a lot of like just the way our systems are set up, compliance-based system, sort of that teaches you that failure is not an option and it's not good, and it's a very self-stigmatizing approach to kind of growing, and it puts us in a position where we end up with a lot of issues. And I think a lot of those issues are avoidable, but we have to start really having honest conversations about how we're cultivating our communities.
Julie, we'll help you.
It's one thing I wanted to share about Christina and her team inside the prison is that the community of staff there, what they provide and the services they provide are so wonderful. I was so surprised when I went the first time and found out that there was no classrooms. There were too many classes going on, which is what we want. We want to see those neighbors who are incarcerated for the moment, that they are continuing to learn and educate themselves and learn about why they're, why they have trauma in their lives, what codependency is, what healthy boundaries look like. But it is the outside, the community, the environment, the ecosystem that needs to be changed. And diversion programs are a beautiful, beautiful thing. I got so excited when Scott said more second chances funding, because it is such a awesome program. And every systemic interaction from school to employer to social service needs to be informed about how to work with individuals with trauma, how to be more trauma informed, how to be unbiased, work on your own biases. And we all just really need to treat each other with compassion.
Thank you. Ron?
How did I know you were going to call on me? Two areas that well, actually three. I know there's a program for posting bonds for folks who have been or about to be incarcerated. And, you know, when I started looking at the statistics of the folks who get locked up because they can't post bond, it's crazy, because you're right. If you have a family, you've lost it. If you have a job, you tend to lose it. And, you know, I just, you know, a long time ago, we talked about the prison industrial system, and I think it's still there. You know, we make money by locking people up. And, you know, the more we lock up, the more funding we get. I would hope that the county commissioners would begin to focus sending more money to halfway houses and supportive houses in the city. It seems to me that back many years ago when Melanie was running this thing, that it just feels like there was more places for folks who were homeless and needed an environment to live in, a halfway house, a rooming house, or whatever. My final thingy is, and this falls on my shoulders, is that I would like to be more involved. I listen to all of the things that are going on, all the activities that are going on, and some of them I just don't know how to access for the folks we have. And that should never be. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Christina?
Christina or Christine? Christina?
Christina, my screen is walking around in a circle.
Uh-oh.
Oh, well, she seems to have
One of the
frozen.
things that we focus would be more housing opportunities. We struggle with individuals who don't have any place to go. Their addresses that they keep submitting keep getting denied because of the people's places and things. So they tend to sit here longer. So more housing opportunities or step down opportunities and assistance for individuals. And we all are aware that space is an issue over here for classes and programmings. So we're open for anybody that wants to do programmings at evenings and weekends. We have all the space in the world. It's just that day shift Monday through Friday that it's which ball is the cup under for where we can place things.
Thank you. Chris?
My turn?
Yep.
So, I just ask that people be more open-minded to this population. Many times the difference between them and us is that we just didn't get caught. And people need to remember that. There's usually a story behind what happened. Listen to their story. Listen to what they've learned from it. Listen to what their goals are. give them that opportunity, that time. I'm not saying every single reentrant is ready to hit the ground running and be a productive member of society, but the majority of them are, and they're just not given that chance. So I just ask that you open your mind and your heart up to what they've been through. A lot of times it has to do with upbringing, people, places, and seeing circumstances, but there's generally a story. Sometimes charges, they just have to pick one. And it sounds really bad, but if you hear the story behind it, you're like, oh my gosh, why isn't there another list of charges that they could have charged you with? Or they have to plead to something that they didn't do to take a lesser charge. So just give them the opportunity to hear their story, because you're going to find out that they're decent people like you and I are. That's all that I ask from people.
Thank you. A reminder, and it builds on that a little bit, that for many individuals, they have to live with the most embarrassing moment of their life every time they apply for a job, every time they go to a party. Imagine you yourself, every time you interacted with a new person, that you had to lead by telling the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you in your entire life. And that's what we force these individuals who come from this population to do. This past Sunday, my last story, this past Sunday, an individual comes to our church. At the end of, during sharing time, he mentions he is looking for a church. He has a criminal background. He said, the last 3 churches I went to told me I wasn't welcome there because I had a criminal background. He said, I'm just trying to find a place that I can be. So we have to do better in faith communities and non-faith communities and our social groups and other places at remembering that human beings are imperfect beings who make mistakes, deserve opportunities to rectify, to restore, and to move on. And I hope that we all, those of us who are watching this live, those of us who are watching it later, can remember that these are our family members. May not be close, but we are all the human race and we are all human family. Thank you all for your attention and for your time. Thank you for the work that you all here are doing. I thank you for your conversation here, panelists. And personally, for me, I just thank all of you who have been attending these monthly since we started them. It's been a deep honor to serve this community that I love deeply here in Lancaster as the president and CEO of United Way. And so for the last time, I'm signing off here. Thank you so much and take care.